Mask of a Diva, a Stan Kraychik mystery, Book 4, 1994. Author, Grant Michaels. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York. Author, Eric Aust. For all the divas, operatic and otherwise. Chapter 24. By the next morning, Maurizio still hadn't shown up, and although he hadn't been absent long enough to be officially reported as a missing person, Daphne had convinced the local police to begin a search for him. "He might be seriously hurt," she had argued to them. "Will you assume responsibility if he's lying injured somewhere?" And just as she had done on those other occasions, Daphne somehow got the Abigail police to do a bidding. She drove the maestro and me to the opera house, but when we arrived there, the maestro didn't get out of the car. Daphne explained, "He's rehearsing his orchestra today." Then she added, "In the concert hall. The stage crew in the opera house has to prepare for the other productions too, you know." I did know, and I also knew the wigs for those other productions were included with their costumes, and it would be someone else's job to style and dress them. My first stop inside the opera house was the wig room, but the ridiculous black wreath was still hanging there and the door was still locked. I knew there was plenty of work to be done inside, even if the wig master was too distraught in mourning. What kind of professional was Daniel Carafelio? I was only a hairdresser, and even I knew the show had to go on. I went backstage to get Rhonda Luca to unlock the wig room, but she wasn't there. Her harried assistant told me I might find Rhonda at the orchestra rehearsal in the concert hall on the far side of the performance center, or she might be at the stage rehearsal in the building next door to the opera house. The assistant didn't try much to hide her annoyance that Rhonda was elsewhere that morning and not where she was sorely needed backstage. I asked the assistant if she could unlock the wig room for me, but she said there just wasn't time. So I set off to find Rhonda Luca. My first stop was the stage rehearsal in the studio building adjacent to the opera house. It was a short walk there, and once inside I found the large open studio easily. Rehearsal was already underway. The studio floor was set up to resemble the opera house stage, but with platforms and chairs and other makeshift objects instead of the actual scenery. Jonathan Byers was in charge, and I was surprised to see at the piano not Carolyn Boetz, but Rick Jensen. It had been a while since I'd heard him abuse a keyboard. The rest of the singing cast was present, all assembled and seemingly eager to work. Perhaps the assurance of the new recording contract and the fast approach of opening night had begun to invigorate them with keen anticipation. The only potential worry was Jonathan Byers' detached, almost callous treatment of Rick, who floundered his way through the score note by perilous note. But there was no Rhonda there to unlock the wig room for me, so I continued to the concert hall across the quadrangle of the performance center. Once inside that building, I got a sonic thrill I hadn't felt for years. Up to that point, all the supporting music I'd heard through all the rehearsals had been with a piano. But that morning, the maestro was rehearsing the opera with a full orchestra, and in spite of the high-tech soundproofing of the concert hall, the old man had the musicians shaking the walls of the outer lobby with Verdi's music. I slipped into the hall to watch and listen. The audience portion of the auditorium was dark, but the stage was brightly lit. The maestro stood on a podium before the orchestra had gone. Was the old body that had day after day curled up in a chair next to the piano to conduct a single player. The maestro now stood erect and strong, an indisputable authority to all the musicians under his baton. Carolyn Boetz sat in a high stool next to the podium. Laid before her was a full orchestra score into which she made numerous notes in pencil, either in response to signs from the maestro, some subtle, some imperative, or from her own expert ear. Once my eyes had adjusted to the darkness, I perceived Rhonda Luca sitting in one of the last rows of the house, also watching the rehearsal. I took the seat behind her where I could whisper over her shoulder. I need the key to the wig room. With nary a word or a jangle, Rhonda unclipped the big ring of keys from her belt and handed it back to me. One key was singled out from the others. Thanks, I whispered. When do you want them back? Keep them, she said. I'll be back there in half an hour. I was about to leave when I realized there was no hurry for me to return to the opera house either. No one was around to scold me, so I could sit behind Rhonda and listen to the music as long as I wanted to. And that's exactly what I did. Watching the maestro was a thrill. I would never have guessed the old guy still had so much fire in him. He waved his arms energetically and the orchestra responded with raw musical power. Then he would hush them suddenly, while he mimicked the lyrics of Amelia in a high-floating falsetto, followed by those of Renato in a faint, hoarse grumble. Then he would fly into animation again, urging more thunder from the orchestra, all to support his whimpering, barking, keening imitations of the singers. It was almost a burlesque of real opera, but all in deadly seriousness. Verdi was well served. And though I was sitting behind Rhonda Luca, I knew she was watching Carolyn Boetz. The intent stillness of her body gave it away. The music might be shaking the rafters, but Rhonda was still and quiet. But then would come that moment when far away on stage Carolyn Boetz would make a small gesture, a turn of the page, a tilt of the head, and Rhonda would respond in some similar way with her own head or body moving ever so slightly, only to settle down on a new vantage point on her beloved until the next small motion that prompted an echo. About half an hour later, halfway through the music of Act 1, Rhonda checked her watch, then got up to leave. She showed only the slightest surprise that I was still stirring behind her. I'll walk you back, I said. On our return to the opera house, I said, The orchestra sounds great, huh? Yeah, said Rhonda. I pressed her with another question. Do you like her a lot? Is the sky blue? Said Rhonda with a sigh. Does she know? It doesn't matter, she replied. Whether or not Carolyn ever feels the same way I do, I'd still do anything in the world for her. That was certainly one version of love. I told Rhonda that I had just heard about the big recording contract for the production of Belo. That's old news, she said. Everybody knows by now. Not me. Maybe you don't travel in the right circles. That seems to be the general consensus among the singers. Well, don't let them get to you, Rhonda said with a laugh. You seem in a good mood. Yeah, well, sure. Since Carolyn is the maestro's assistant, she's going to be involved with the recording as well. That's a big break for her. Sounds like the whole cast got hired for this recording. Yeah, said Rhonda. It turned out kind of lucky for everyone. Except the dead diva. Rhonda smiled tentatively. Well, I guess someone's got to take the bad luck. It wasn't luck that slashed her throat, Rhonda. Someone wanted her out of the way. Maybe it was a record company, said Rhonda. They sure want that cow in full-fledged digital sound. Was she supposed to sing on the recording? Oh, never, said Rhonda assuredly. Everyone knew Marcella Ostinata was a has-been. But she made her usual big noise about the recording. That's what held up the contract of the cow and her lawyers. Once again, I wondered if Madama Ostinata had such a bad reputation. Why had she been hired to sing in the first place? And how far would Rhonda Luca go in her unrequited love for Carolyn Boetz? With Marcella Ostinata out of the way, the record company had moved quickly to engage the whole cast along with Maestro Toscanelli. Rhonda knew it was inevitable that he would take Carolyn along for the bonus as well, had she hastened her paramour's success by killing the old singer. I said, Too bad for you, the record company doesn't need a stage manager. You'd probably have a contract now, too. Nah, said Rhonda. They use production assistants, and I've already done that. It's like boot camp. Back in the wig room, I settled down to get some real work done. I became so engrossed with my projects that I forgot to have any lunch or my usual afternoon snack. Now that's dedication. At the rate I was going, even if Daniel never showed up again, the cast would be fabulously coiffed by soon-to-be slender and fabulous moi. I was just putting the finishing touches on a woman's rig for the last scene of the opera, which is the actual masked ball of the title. That was the one scene in the production where the costumes and wigs didn't have to be consistent with the rest of the eccentric setting. Contemporary Manhattan, in fact. The sets for the first three acts were quite gray and dismal, but the costumes were vividly colored, supposedly to reflect the hidden passions among the players in a hostile, oppressive environment. In contrast, the finale was set in a bright and colorful ballroom, while all the costumes for the ball, however elegant, were strictly black and white, supposedly to reflect the stark hidden motives of the characters in a festival atmosphere. It was hackneyed exercise in theatrical contrast, but if Jonathan Byers could blithely set Verdi's Un Bello in Mascara in contemporary Manhattan, who was I to worry about anachronism? I intended to style the wigs to hold the audience rapt. In fact, the one in my hand was truly de troupe, with ringlets and waves set off by an extravagant bouffant. It would have done Louis XIV proud, and I was pleased with my unexpected inspiration. That's exactly when an unexpected visitor arrived. Lieutenant Branco. Branco hadn't shown up the previous night when Daphne had called the police after my attack, and I was still a little miffed. I was his deputy, after all. Did that count for anything? Branco very rationally explained why he hadn't come himself to take the report. He'd been confirming the whereabouts of Bruce David, and then he had become entangled in a search for the maid, Mathilda, but the cop's words came out easily without apology, almost flippant, as though he was talking shop with another cop. I suppose such apparent equality should have pleased me, but from where I stood, Lieutenant Branco had performed his professional duties to the ultimate degree of dedication for two complete strangers, albeit suspects. But when a more personal contingency had arisen in the form of moi, his deputy, being attacked, Branco had washed his hands of it and sent in the Abigail police. I read the report about the incident last night, he said. Is everything okay now? Sure, I said. Branco gave me a skeptical look, then he said, By the way, do you remember what you had to eat and drink? I wasn't drunk, I protested. It really happened. Sometimes an odd combination can make you hallucinate. Just like love. Maybe that's all you wanted from him. Who? That little guy who shows up and disappears a lot. Lieutenant Morazio saved my life. Sure, he said. I'm just glad you weren't hurt. At a previous juncture of my life, a remark like that from Branco would have sent me running from my trousseau, but that afternoon the lieutenant's comment sounded like a polite brush-off to someone with unpredictable behavior. Lieutenant, I said, I was attacked. The guy had a knife. I believe you, he said. No, you don't. I can tell by your voice. Stan, we have to keep our trust here. I'd rather hear that you don't believe me if that's the truth, instead of a cautious lie that says we're supposed to trust each other. I watched his strong jaw and clench and release. I had created an instant showdown between us, small but serious. Branco wasn't used to this kind of thing. One man asking another for spiky honesty rather than bland trust. Certainly not with the guys back at headquarters who probably thrived on team spirit and manly bonding. But now Branco was dealing with me, Stan Kraychik, master hairdresser, poetic wig maker, irksome homosexual. Branco said, Okay, Stan, I'll be completely honest with you, if that's what you want. I'm a little concerned about how you always seem to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's something you're going to have to recognize if you keep working for me. You could get yourself in a real dangerous position, and you're not armed. I was in danger last night, and where were you? Sometimes I wonder if you put yourself in that kind of situation on purpose, just to see what might happen. What? You think I was one looking for sex in the bushes? I don't know what I think, Stan. That's enough, Lieutenant. Thanks. Branco frowned unhappily. What did you want me to say? I wanted the truth. That was the truth. What else do you want? I want you to believe I was attacked last night, even if there wasn't supporting evidence in the report. That's asking me to lie, Stan. I'd do it for you. You'd lie to me, if the situation called for it. Then that's where we're different, said the cop. I would never want you to lie to me. Not even to spare your feelings. Not then, not ever, he said fiercely. The air became still between us. When Branco spoke again, his eyes looked a little sad, a little disappointed. You know, he said, I actually let myself think I might become a better cop for having you work with me. Heedless of my higher self, I retorted. That sounds like one of those movies where a man dresses up like a woman and has an epiphany. The cop bristled. I said quickly, I'm sorry, that wasn't fair. You think you're the only one in the world with feelings. It's a survival tactic, I offered weakly. Look, Stan, said my hero, if we're going to work together, you have to accept things the way they are. I can't start saying things to you I don't mean. I thought you'd know that by now. I blushed. He was right. I did know it. My head lowered. I asked, should I hand in my badge? Is that what you want? No, I squeaked. Then just keep throwing me those good leads the way you have so far and I'll listen. But that's the only guarantee I can make. That I'll listen. As far as what I say to you, well, he trailed off without finishing. Lieutenant, you were right about one thing. I do get into jams sometimes, but I didn't imagine that attack last night. When we find Maurizio, he'll verify the whole thing. In the meantime, said Branco, you'd better be extra careful. Branco scanned the wig room with its stockpiles of hair and nets and lacquer and dummies, and the shelves full of finished wigs and the tables full of works in progress. It would appear to be chaos to the unknowing eye. He said, so this is where you work? I nodded. He turned to leave the room and was almost out the door when he stopped and said, I'll call you later. Thanks, I said. I listened to his footsteps go down the hall and up the stairway to the stage door, then I went back to work. Before leaving the opera house that day, I explored some of the uncharted corridors on the upper floors and found a dance rehearsal in progress. Watching the dancers and the choreographer, I felt a sudden yearning for my lover. What was he doing in Paris at that moment? Why were we separated? What did the wigs matter? Or a Diva's murder? The dancers in rehearsal seemed immune to mundane worries. Their only concern was movement and music. I stood outside the rehearsal studio and watched them sliding and turning along the floor, then becoming airborne and carefree. I should have been heartened by them and the lightness of their exercise. Like some of the other artistes in the opera house, their sights were still set on the work at hand and on opening night. It was a good life to be working in the arts. So why did I feel so bad? Hell, I was Branco's assistant in training. That should have been cause to rejoice and join in with the dancers, but instead I found myself watching them and almost sobbing. I fought hard to hold back the tears, and for an instant I felt that I understood a tiny bit why Lieutenant Branco always seemed so austere. Perhaps that cool facade wasn't his nature. Perhaps it was his work that required him to hold his emotions down. Push them back, disregard them, just like a surgeon does. Sometimes there was no room for feelings. How else could one person slice open the body of another in the name of healing? Or pursue and convict, even kill someone else in the name of justice? The only way to prevail was with distance, a cold and calculated distance laid between you and the object of your attention. That's what I needed, objectivity, psychic distant, about a mile's worth. But for all my faulty reasoning, I still wanted to cry when I left the opera house. Then I realized that I hadn't eaten all day. My emotional distress was simply low blood sugar. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.